Welcome to this episode of the HR and CQ show. This episode, we're going to be giving you a roundup of the year 2025. We've been talking about Emiratisation. We've been talking about the employee life cycle this year. We've talked about data-driven HR, CQ in practice. So lots of really interesting topics. Sarah, what were your key highlights this year for you?
So we've had so many great conversations over the past 12 months with multiple different guests joining us, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have some of them with us. Having guests like Dr. David Livermore talking about cultural intelligence at the beginning, absolutely inspiring with the work that he's been doing. And then talking with Shazia and, as we've seen, Umnia from Chalhoub Group when we did the recording at Ruya, talking about Emiratisation and bringing more Emiratis into the workplace. This, for me, was one of the key conversations that we've had. We've had so many great ones, not to put everybody else down, but this is really insightful because it's a hot topic. We've got the next big milestone is coming at the end of this year, so literally the 31st of December, and then we will find out what the targets are for next year moving forwards that companies have to achieve. So I think Emiratisation is really something that's at the crux of conversation still, and it will be for a while. Emma, can you give us some of what were your key takeaways from the conversations that we had in terms of engaging that Emirati culture within the workplace? How can we drive that? How can we make that happen?
Yeah, I think the conversation that we had with Umnia was really interesting for me. We were talking to her about what does Chalhoub do to attract Emirati talent, and we also shared with her some of the struggles that we'd heard from HR leaders within other organisations to attract Emirati talent, and she, I thought, gave some really great tips on what companies can do to attract that talent. So one of the things that she shared was making sure that you're an attractive brand. So what are you doing to show that you're investing in Emiratis so that when they think about coming to work for you, they see it as kind of a lifetime career, that they see that the career journey that you're going to take them on, how you are intending to develop them as individuals within the organisation. But she also talked about the different initiatives that they have within the organisation that make sure that Emiratis feel part of the team, feel welcome, that they understand the culture of the organisation. So those things for me were fascinating.
Yeah, for me too, because I know that, like you, we hear from different HR contacts, connections and in our networks, some of the challenges. And, whilst there are many companies that find it a struggle to source and to engage with Emiratis. I think the story of the achievements that Chalhoub Group have with the Emiratis joining the business at all levels and in all roles and in some positions which you potentially would not stereotypically think that an Emirati would be attracted to work in and succeed in, by all accounts. It's a real eye-opener for me as well of rethinking how we approach this Emirati recruitment in the workforce. And if we think back to the conversations that we've had with Shazia with regards to engaging that cultural element within the workplace, what are the key tips that you can give for that? So those companies who are working towards the end of the year and bringing Emiratis into the workforce, how can we manage the employment culture, the company culture, to engage them?
I think you and I were talking off camera about the misconception that non-Emiratis or expats have about, bringing Emiratis into the workplace. Unfortunately, there still is this kind of fake Emiratisation happening where people recruit people in just for the quota and not actually bringing them in and including them into being part of the team. And we were just discussing how you were saying it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
Where if you have a perception that you're not going to be able to utilize Emiratis as an employee, you then don't give them the right level of work and responsibility, accountability. And so it's self-fulfilling. You know, you are, as a leader, then potentially creating
non-constructive work environments.
Yeah, exactly. And so we need to do away with those, you know, misconceptions or preconceptions of the way that Emiratis are going to work in the workplace, and be more open-minded to the idea that actually there's a lot of amazing Emirati talent out there that, you know, want to come to work and want to do an amazing job, but the leader needs to, lead them well, basically, and treat them like every other employee in terms of the way that they distribute work to them, and how they include them as being part of the team. I think also you just mentioned briefly there that the quote, there's a new deadline coming in. So maybe you can share some information about like how you think Emiratisation is going to continue in the future. What do you think that's going to look like?
So it's not going to stop, and the quota is going to keep growing within businesses. We've seen this year that it was brought in for the smaller companies, so the 20 to 49 headcounts. Previously, it was for the 50 plus. And I think those numbers are going to increase. I hope for small businesses, they don't drop that number lower than 20, because I think that would be a really, really big challenge. But I think 20 is a reasonable headcount to start with for applying a quota. It's going to continue and it's going to increase. The larger companies are going to have higher achievements to make in 2026 and then onwards from 2027, because if I remember correctly, the original target was for an achievement by 2026. So we've got next year to go. I would urge companies not to rest on their laurels, not to wait until the 1st of January. Start thinking about the recruitment now and planning for those positions and bringing them on board through the whole of next year, so that it's not a mad dash in the last quarter of 2026 to achieve the quota, which is where we are at the minute. For those companies who are, and there are still some out there, who are not recruiting and bringing Emiratis on board, that are maintaining to pay the fines instead, you need to be creative and think of different ways to involve Emiratis in your workplace, because at some point the ministry are going to stop the fines and are going to draw a line and say, no, sorry, you need to hire people, you're not making an effort, and put restrictions on visa quotas for expatriates, put restrictions on potentially trade license renewals and things like this and other approvals that then countermand your business. And that's a big risk, I think, for a few companies out there.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about Emiratisation for this year and what that looks like for the year ahead briefly. But I think the other big topic was the talent movement here in Dubai this year. Latest stats show that the population within Dubai significantly grew, surpassing the 4 million resident mark. In Q1, they were saying we were seeing an influx of around 1,000 new residents on a daily basis. And I think throughout the year, then that maybe stabilised a little bit. The latest stats are saying that the population was adding to approximately 567 people per day. So there was probably peaks and troughs of that, and it averaged out at around 5, 6, 7 per day. But basically what we're saying is that the population is ever increasing, and with that then means that there's a lot of talent movement, people coming in from all different countries around the world. What does that mean then for HR?
That it's a big challenge for HR because, I mean, in many respects, there are those who will say, you know, great, we've got a bigger talent pool to pull from. We're not having to hire from overseas. We've got more people in country that we can hire from. But I think you've also got to consider that you've got more people who are coming here without necessarily having a lot of research behind them, a lot of a plan behind them. They are moving to better themselves, to escape situations in their home countries, to have a different quality of life and what have you. The Dubai and the UAE is painted very well across the media in terms of to attract people to come, with the Dubai lifestyle that is as such. I think, unfortunately, though, people moving don't actually do the research to understand what is the workplace like, and it's something that I hear a lot of individuals who have moved over here, who are predominantly from Western cultures, coming to work in companies, and they find the workplace is toxic, when in actuality I don't believe it is toxic. I think it's actually that they aren't adjusting to the workplace and to the diversity of workforce. Yeah. One of the things that I often say, and I'll throw this over to you to either correct me or support me on this one, is that, we come from a multicultural country. The UK is multicultural. We have an almost as diverse mix of cultures in the UK as we do here in Dubai. However, in the UK, in the workforce, in the workplace, the cultures are more morphed towards the British culture, and everybody kind of engages that, rather than in Dubai, where there are strong pillars of individualism and individual cultures that are supported within the workplace. And that could potentially be what is the difference and why people are seeing that it's toxic.
Yeah, so I would tend to agree. I've heard similar things where you've got young expats arriving in country, and then they're describing the workplace as toxic. I think that's because they've perhaps come from a much flatter culture where they're used to a situation where we collaborate around the table. They're comfortable speaking up. They're also comfortable challenging upwards if they need to. And yet, actually, the leaders that they're reporting into don't come from that same culture, which then means that those leaders maybe come from a more authority-orientated culture, where it would be culturally inappropriate to challenge upwards, and in fact, it would even go as far as to say be disrespectful. And so then they might find this young talent coming in might find themselves being reprimanded for being disrespectful to the leader, and they're kind of puzzled and confused about what have I done wrong. And then because they're not used to it, describe it as toxic. So I would go as far as to say that the culture here isn't toxic. It's just that people maybe don't do their research before they arrive. They see the glitz and glamour of Dubai online. They want a piece of that, and then when they come to the workplace, it's not quite what they had anticipated it would be. And so in terms of what would my advice be from a cultural perspective, it would be, firstly, do your research before you come. You might be even headhunted to work in a multinational corporate that whose brand name you're familiar with from your home country, but the dominant culture of that brand here in the UAE may not mean that the shape and the culture, the organizational culture and the values and the behaviours that are at play in the office here in Dubai are the same as what you might anticipate in your home country or in the country where that brand is headquartered. And so, it is worth doing your homework. How are you going to flex and adapt your approach? Are you comfortable with reporting into somebody who is more authority orientated than you, for example, and what adjustments might you need to make to be ready for that? If you're taking on a role in the interview stage, are you asking what is the culture in the office? Are you understanding the culture of the person you're going to be reporting to? Are you ready for the differences that you might face? And what we're not saying is that one approach or another is right or wrong. What we're saying is be mindful that there may be a difference, and how can you prepare for that so that you're ready for the change that you're going to receive? Yeah,
I think one of the tools that people can use to help them with that, and it's often that because there's obviously the separation between what is a workplace culture, like how the work does how the company does things, versus an individual's cultural behaviour.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we don't necessarily identify our own cultural behaviours in order to be able to recognise other people's. And I think one of the tools that I would recommend, because I find it really useful, is your book.
Oh, thanks.
And it's something that I know, I mean, I find it useful. I find it useful when I'm coaching and mentoring people to get them to stop when they have conversations with me and go, oh my God, this person behaved this way. And I'm like, okay, stop, think, what's their culture? What are their driving values? How are they, maybe this is why they behave that way. So how can you adapt what you're saying and you're asking to accommodate their needs rather than just coming from where you are, and especially as leaders, that's something that we really need to be aware of. But for someone who's new joining a company over here, just understanding that element about yourself will help you understand how and why people behave in certain ways towards you, react, reflect, and then flex a bit. Find happy middle ground to say, look, I know you like this, but I like that. And can we find a way in the middle, and adapt yourself? Because, it's a long way to come. It's a lot of investment for people to come to throw in the towel, so to speak, after a very short time because they haven't had that tool and haven't been able to adjust and adapt. So using that will help people, I'm sure.
I didn't pay her to say that. No, but I think curiosity is the first step.
Yep.
And also having an open mind and recognizing that your way isn't necessarily always the right way, and being ready to think about people's behaviors in a more curious way rather than immediately taking offense to or assuming that their way is wrong. So I think you're right. Like for me, there definitely needs to be that self-reflection and that openness to curiosity, being curious about somebody else's approach, not immediately taking offense to it, and thinking about, why is this person behaving in this way? And I've seen a number of situations in training workshops that I've been delivering where people have that light bulb or aha moment when I'm describing a behavior and they realize that this challenge that they've been facing with their colleague is in fact not what they've been assuming, and that actually there's just a cultural difference. And I think that CQ or cultural intelligence is becoming more and more of a topic that's being talked about this year, because a number of the different HR events that we've both attended, it seems to be something that more and more people are talking about, not just me. So I definitely think it's a topic that we're going to see more and more discussions and more companies interested in how we can develop it within our employee network over the coming years. But in terms of that talent movement and the impact that that's then had on HR, there's obviously a surge of hiring. There's a surge of new people in the business. So what responsibility does that mean for HR? What things are they having to think about that they've perhaps not had so much pressure to think about in the past?
It's the immediacy of hiring people, I think, because in the past, a lot of companies, and there's been a bit of a flex over the years, where overseas recruitment from particular companies has only been for very senior level roles, let's say, and that has changed dramatically. There are more individuals coming that are willing to take more junior roles and comparatively lower salaries for positions to get a foot on the ladder, and that's something that I'm pleased to see. It's a positive thing, that because there is a what would you say, a presumption that individuals from a certain nationality require a certain level of salary, and this is changing, which is great. It does mean, though, that some employers are taking advantage, and as we know, the market is so tough at the moment from recruitment because there are so many candidates. But companies are reducing salary offerings because they can, because it's the employer's market as opposed to employees. And that's one of the challenges that I would say, from an HR perspective, stick to your guns of, if somebody's worth the money because of qualifications and expertise, don't undercut them, pay them what they're worth, because you're devaluing the individual, you're devaluing the qualifications and skills in whichever profession that is, and that's, you know, not a good thing to happen. And as we see, you know, HR are doing it to their own profession as well as others, and we shouldn't be accepting it. Other challenges is that integration of new people into the Middle East, into the UAE, with their expectations, and having them to understand what is real life in Dubai like versus what you see on TV or on the internet and things like this. There are some very good sources of information out and about, websites and things that you can go and get that information from, but just making sure that you communicate that well with the individuals concerned. There's also challenges with regards to the more from a governance perspective and the legalities, individuals who have not quite understood their contractual terms and conditions. Maybe it hasn't been explained to them, maybe they haven't even been provided them, and that is something that the HR need to take responsibility for. One of the other topics we had was talking about the maturity of HR and how it's growing and developing. We still need to remember that there is an element of governance at our core, and we are responsible for applying the legislation and complying with it, but we need to take responsibility to make sure that people who are joining our companies understand what their rights are legally, and then we comply with them. I've had a number of people who have joined and had really bad experiences because companies haven't done that. They haven't explained to them, and they believe because they're employed by somebody of the same culture as them that they'll be treated in a certain way, that they'll receive, you know, a fair process, and they haven't either received a fair process by law or by culture, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of the really big points for me that companies need to think about.
Okay, so beyond Emiratisation and the talent movement, I think one of the things that we should probably touch on is, the maturing role of HR. In one of our very early episodes, you were talking about the fact that HR in some organisations in this region is still very much perceived as an admin function, and you were then talking about, but there is a huge array of capabilities in the whole HR function, ranging from very basic admin right through to more business partner approach. What does that look like, do you think, what does it look like this year, and what does it look like going forward?
So a lot of the conversations that I've had, there has been a real desire for some of the more admin heavy companies and HR representatives from them to move forwards into new HR, into that HR business partnering perspective. And that's really, it's a very positive thing to see. They do face a number of challenges with that, because it's all very well being the HR person that wants to do it, but you can't be that explorer striving out on your own. You do need a backup team with you, and you do need your support with you as well, which is your key stakeholders in the business. So I see that there's still a long way to go before it's going to become second nature. But the drive and the desire to change, to improve things is out there. Given the frameworks that we have under the structure of the labour law, for example, with part-time working hours and various other elements that have been brought in to strengthen the flexible working, remote working, and all of these options, it gives a little bit more breadth to individuals and companies to be able to accommodate that. But we need to go further than that. We need to be looking at workplace culture, wellness, psychological safety, all of these key buzzwords that are coming up. And they're not just buzzwords, they are actually things that we should be doing. But those drivers need to be pushed a little bit more from a ownership and directorship level of businesses, not just be the HR individuals waving a flag.
Yeah, and I think to your point, that of them not being buzzwords, there is in the country's vision, Vision 2030, this desire to drive certain kind of organizational behaviors, certain governance, certain expectations being put on organizations for the way that they need to be treating their staff, the different reports that need to be, or data that needs to be captured that they're going to be expected to report on. So to be able to operate at that level, there does need to be a maturing of the function in terms of the things that they're responsible for, and recognise that it isn't just payroll, recruitment, but that actually they definitely need to be taking on this much broader, deeper role of HR, and actually having a seat at the table to be.
Yeah, no, they do, and it needs to move from and if we give a good example of performance review and performance management structures and disciplinaries, for example, it needs to be less of the phone call to HR, send a letter to this person because they've done something wrong, and more of the coaching and mentoring approach to understand why has this person done something wrong, how can we help them not do that again. Is it because we failed? Have we not given them the right equipment, the right training, the right tools? Or is it actually just is it a competency versus capability? Is it a conduct issue? Looking more deeper into that, but then actually trying to iron out why and remove the issue. Because, it's a proven fact that if you approach such situations with the more positive mentality and the more business partnership approach, rather than just sending a letter, you can actually change people's behaviour, and they actually then become a really good employee because you've given them the time, you've given them that investment, and they'll be more loyal, they'll stay with you longer. But just, send a letter we need to wave goodbye to that process, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so there's lots of then, I suppose, learning and development then required also for our HR functions in terms of how do we move them from a more admin role into that business partnering role. There's a high expectation on what they're going to be responsible for in the future, how they're going to be guiding and leading the organisation in terms of their people. But it's going to be a journey that they need to be taken on. You can't just take somebody that's been doing general admin and have this expectation that they can now perform these other skill set that they've never been shown how to do before. It's not something they've ever experienced before. So there is, I suppose, a requirement then to think about how are we developing our HR people so that we're equipping them with the ability to do these new things.
And unfortunately, HR is one of the last departments to get, in most companies, to get any kind of formal upskilling. Past, okay, let's do interview skills. And once you've got that tick, okay, well, then what? And I think, that's something that can be focused on. I would urge leaders and stakeholders to consider putting their HR teams through a sort of coaching and mentoring course, feedback, how to deal difficult conversations, cultural awareness, your cultural intelligence courses as well, to give them the skills and develop that capability to have such conversations. They're never going to be easy, but the more skills you have around them, the more easier it will be, and productive as well, and with beneficial outputs, let's say.
But also, understanding beyond employment law as well. I think, firstly, I think there's a lack of understanding around the employment law. So, yes, there does need to be an embedding and understanding of that within your team. But also then, if you want to be an employer of choice, how can you go beyond just the bare minimal requirements? Yeah. How can you be an appealing business that people want to come and work for? Especially thinking back to that conversation we had earlier in this podcast about, how do we attract Emirati talent? How do we make sure we support new talent coming in? We need to make sure that we're going beyond the very limits of what's required of us and thinking about how do we become an employer of choice.
Yeah, and that's a really big topic to unpack. I wish we had, maybe this is for another podcast. Yeah. Because, it's something that I often, and people who are in the same networking groups as me will hear me often say, that's the legal minimum. If you want to do more, go ahead. As long as you're not breaking the law, it's not a problem. And understanding that doing more than the law is not breaking it, it's enhancing it, is actually quite a big conceptual jump for some people. A lot of it comes down to cultural behaviours as well, and the application of legalities from a cultural perspective. But it's also, that understanding of, well, if the law says I give 30 days and I can only give 30 days, they don't quite get that, well, actually you can give 37 and still not be breaking the law. And, you could... Working hours is another one that people exchange the maximum working hours to the minimum working hours, and don't quite understand that people could work less than 48 and still be legally working full time. But just because it doesn't say that in the law doesn't mean that you can't do that. So there's a whole load of things around there that we need to unpack in another conversation, I think.
Absolutely.
So coming to the end then, because we've had, we talked about some of the key highlights that we've discussed in the podcast over the last 12 months. What's coming up for next year, I think, is the next big topic. We are going to be doing more events, people. We are going to be holding the Breakfast Bites in January, and I can say that tickets are on sale, and it will be on the 27th of January. The venue will be Radisson Red and Silicon Oasis, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And it'll be a morning session, timing as before. We are going to be talking about the upcoming trends for 2026 and some key pieces of information around cultural intelligence in the workplace, as well as obviously the HR element of that, and various topics.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about kind of key HR trends to look out for 2026. So if you are a people leader, a HR leader or a C-suite leader who has a responsibility for people within your organisation, then this is definitely an event for you. We're looking forward to seeing some familiar faces, but we're also eager to see some new faces at those events. So if you've not been to one of our Breakfast Bites before, then we would encourage you to come along. So as Sarah said, it's the 27th of January, and it will be a morning session, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Yep, it's been a fantastic year, and I've really enjoyed all the conversations we've had, and with our guests as well. So thank you again to all of them for joining us. There's been many. And here's to another fabulous 12 months.
And thank you to our listeners.
Thank you very much. Take care.